Jesse Brooks are going to come. Y'all come on up, fellas, and share with us, or ever how you do it. You come together. I don't know if one of you call this tag team preaching, I guess. Amen. Hey, buddy.
God bless you, brother.
I had announced this a couple of months ago, I guess, and probably a little more than that. We talked, and I wanted you to hear what I heard. Gene sharing his testimony, and Wesley's right. It's remarkable. You're going to be blessed today, and I pray God uses them to speak to your hearts and our hearts today. Come ahead, buddy.
Well, that song they sing, we asked Jesse to ask him if they could learn that song for us. I'm going to cry for him. That was sung in the chapel downstairs in a hospital when we was in the darkest, most difficult time in our whole life. And it was really what I needed. And you'll come to find out when we get there giving our testimony that in our life, and I know in your life, that may sound just like words, but He is really all you need. You don't need nothing else. He will take care of every single need that you could possibly need in your life, from the smallest to the biggest. I had a little bit of reservation about telling you guys my testimony because of the kind of person I was. And then we've been coming to church here. Of course, I ain't been seeing none of you guys but the back of your heads. Now I can see your faces. I've been sitting out there. Y'all look pretty good. But anyway, growing up, I was raised in a broken home. My mom was in and out of marriages 3 or 4 times. And one of the blessed things about that was not that she was not a Christian, but she always dropped the kids off at her mom and dad's, my grandparents. We called them mom and dad. And they was Christians. My grandfather was a holiness, Church of God preacher. Didn't pastor a church, but he was a preacher. And my grandmother, she was a preacher too. She would preach to you. Probably baptized us as kids. If baptism could have saved you, brother, I'd have been saved when I was real little. So she probably baptized us in the bathtub a bunch of times. But we would go to Granny's house, and I want to tell you guys to where you'll really understand this. It really came full circle to me later on in life. My grandmother, if she spilled a glass of milk, the first thing would come out of her mouth was Jesus. It was always Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. We always say, call on Jesus. And as a little kid, we always thought it was kind of ridiculous because she called on Him for everything. I mean, no matter what it was. My grandmother, she couldn't drive. And she would, back then, we're talking about years and years and years and years ago. Back then, she would be driving, and if she bumped into a car, she'd just, excuse me, and if it was parked or whatever, and she'd just, go on. Just start praying about it. Well, she come over, she was really a bad driver. But she come over to the house one time and was wanting to take us kids home with her for the weekend. And my stepdad said, no, Clarice, you go on home, we'll bring them over. Because he didn't want us in the car with her. And anyway, she left the house, and we lived in a trailer park down in the hill, and she pulled up on the main road, and you could hear a screeching and a crash and everything, and we instantly knew what had happened. She had just left, and she can't drive, and it's run through your mind. And my mother told all of us kids to stay here. And my stepdad and my mother went running up on top of the hill, and sure enough, she had pulled out in front of somebody and had an accident. And when my mother got there, my grandmother, little old short lady, about 5 foot, that really seriously everything in her life was about Jesus. She had drugged this guy out of the car, and she was laying over top of him and had her hands on him and was praying for him. And my mother was saying, get away from him, he's hurt. She said, boy, I'm taking care of that. I'm calling on Jesus to take care of him. She really believed. And we kind of lost that in our society today. But she really believed that He could take care of everything, and He was really all she really needed. She didn't need 911. She didn't need somebody to do anything. She knew the person she could call on for everything. So it was one day we come home from school, and some of my friends come home with me. We was playing out in the yard. And I would do it on purpose as a joke back then. I would say, go tell Mom we want something to drink. She can make some good iced tea. And a couple of them, knew about what was going to take place. And no, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to go in there. And once the word got out, they wouldn't nobody go in there. I'd have to go in there and get it. But what would take place is, if you ever walked in my grandmother's house and she didn't know you, the first thing she would do, probably scare you to death, but the first thing she'd probably do, she'd lay hands on you and start praying for you. She wouldn't let you come in her house unless she prayed for you. And I'm saying all that to say this. I was little. And as time went on and my grandmother and grandfather died and we went our ways, and I got older and everything and got hooked on drugs and all these things that happened, when I remembered all of that, I can remember every bit of it. Didn't ever remember it then, but the day I got saved, God brought every bit of that back to remembrance, and I've never forgot it. And I tell everybody that everywhere we go, don't think for 1 minute that these children, grannies and grandpas, ain't paying attention to what you're doing. They're watching, and I don't think that anything that you'll ever do that's godly will go unnoticed by God. He'll bring it back to their I remember them things, and all through my life I can't remember ever remembering that. But I grew up in that kind of atmosphere and got hooked on drugs, and I was a pretty bad druggie. On my own business, would not work unless we was high. We had to have marijuana. It was marijuana back then, but it was very addictive. And we wouldn't even lay brick until we was high. I had a real strong addiction to it. Everywhere we went, I had to be high. And my famous words was, GD. I cussed God almost all my life. Didn't really intentionally look up at God and say GD. It was just a word that I was taught by other people in the society and the way that we was raised. It was GD this and GD that. And now I think, brother, how could he love me? Well, I cussed him all my life. Well, kept on going to the drug scene and everything, and we moved to South Georgia. I met my wife, and we got married, had kids, and moved to South Georgia, and we was living there, and pastors or preachers or all of my whole family was Christians, and I had heard about Jesus all my life. If you was a pastor and you walked up on a job, we'd actually work for some pastors, and they would start telling us about Christ. Well, we'd just blow them off, And my famous saying, I had built this wall up, was if there was a God, why don't He come back and show Himself, prove Himself? You say it's in this Bible that He parted the sea, they walked on water, all these great miracles that took place. And I would say, if He's that good, why don't He come back and show Himself? And every time I was approached by a Christian or somebody that wanted to talk to me about Christ, I would always say that, And that was a defense mechanism I had built up, that, because I had heard the story of Jesus from a little bitty tot all the way up. I knew it word for word. Knew the scriptures, how to say them, and knew all that stuff. But I would always say, if He loved us like you say He does, won't He show Himself? Well, when we moved to Adel, I got in touch with this homeowner, and he asked us to come out and brick his house. His name was Donald Sheely, and we went out there and got to meet him. And now you got to picture this. This is a whole gang of drug addicts that smoked dope on the job. We wouldn't really drink on the job, but we would actually, stay high. And Mr. Sheely, he treated us different than anybody that we had ever been treated by before. He didn't condemn us. He didn't threaten us. He knew what kind of people we was. You know what Mr. Sheely would do? He loved us. We had never ever, me and my guys, we'd never been treated like this before. This man loved us so much, and you could tell it. He would come up to you before we start work in the morning. He'd come over to you and hug your neck, put you in a headlock, maybe give you a noogie, treat you like you meant something. He really, his character and his flowed off that you could tell that he cared about you. You know, God give a dog enough sense to know if you're scared of him or not. You don't think he give a human being enough sense to know if you love him? You could tell there was something different about this man. And we began to know him, and we bricked his house, and we bricked his horse barn. I remember one thing that he said, Mr. Sheely said, I want my horse barn. He's going to brick his mother-in-law's house. He wound up bricking his whole family's, and everybody's out there on the farm. He said, I want my horse barn to look better than my mother-in-law's house. And I said, really? He said, yeah, we're going to make it fancy, you know. Everybody else ain't got to be fancy, but my horses, we're going to make their house fancy. But he was a good guy, and he had won our respect. And we would be sitting around on another job after all this took place with Mr. Sheely, and we would say, you know, if we ever grow up, we'd like to be like Mr. Sheely. He loved everybody. Mr. Sheely was the person that he didn't hug your neck in church and then shy away from you in the store. He didn't become a part of your life out there on his farm where nobody could see it. If he's seen us in the grocery store, now here he's a good Christian, well-respected man in town. Here we are, long-haired hippie and more than likely high. But if he's seen you in the store, he'd come up to you and love on you. And it blew me away. I'd never had a man do me that way before. And it was all God's plan. Later on, what happened was after Mr. Sheely had showed us that kind of love, and we had learned to love him and respect him, my daughter was in his granddaughter's class, and his granddaughter, I got to know them kids, knew everybody in his family. His granddaughter was chasing her dog and went across the street, and a car hit her, and really messed her up. Me and my brother was sitting in town when they come through town. There was an ambulance and vehicles following them. They had blocked a road off where they could come through town, and the hospital in the town where we lived was behind us, and the major hospital was in Valdosta. You know, they had to hit the interstate and go that way. And when they passed us and they didn't go toward the hospital, I told my brother, I said, whoever's in that vehicle is hurt very bad. They're not even stopping at the hospital here. You could tell it was a caravan of people following them. They took her to South Georgia Medical Center, and Mr. Sheely was telling us this later on. He said, we got her there, and they started working on her, and they said, he said, I'm the granddaddy. I want to know if she's going to make it. And they said, Mr. Sheely, we have never seen a child in this shape before, ever live. She's more than likely not going to make it. But we don't have time to wait on a chopper. We're going to transport her to Shands Medical Center down in Gainesville, Florida. So they loaded her up, and they began that trip down there. And on the way down there, they'd stopped a couple of times, thought they was losing her. And what had happened was they got there, they run her through the MRI, and this is a girl that had a seriously head injury, multiple broken bones, all kind of eternal things going on. And they ran her through the MRI, and when she come back out, she had one broke bone in her whole body, and it was her collarbone. God had done a miracle in this girl's life. And Mr. Sheely's telling us this now. And I was always the type of person, even when I was lost, I would look in the eye, I want to know, who you are. I didn't care to stare you down. But I had learned that if he tells you something, you better believe it. And he's telling me that, and then here goes that wall up. Really? Is that really happening? And then I'm thinking, I've done learned that I love this man. Now, can he lie to us about what's taking place? And in my heart, I'm thinking, he's not lying. I can tell by the way he's talking about it. He's telling the truth. And then at that moment, God had begun to work on my heart. And it was the little girl. And what happened was, she got there, and then my daughter was in her classroom, and my daughter kept saying, Daddy, let's go see her, let's go see her, let's go see her. And I'd say, I don't want to go see nobody in that bad of shape. Just got run over by a car and all this. And so, anyway, 3 months later, she got moved to a facility closer to home, and my family taught me into going to see her. And I'd have went to see her just to get them to shut up because they wouldn't leave me alone. Nobody was telling me what I was fixing to see. I walked in the hospital, walked in the room, and Lindsay was sitting up in bed playing cards. And you remember what I told you? What I would tell you, Pastor? If there was a God, why don't He show Himself? Why don't He prove Himself? Instantly, for the first time in my life since I was a child, tears started rolling out my eyes, the scales was dropped down, and I seen what nobody else was maybe seeing in the whole room, but I seen a picture of who God really is. I left, went down the hall, got my composure, and I come back and I got my family, and I said, let's get out of here. And we left. And so we'd sold our house, we was going to build a house, and we was working on a job, and I could not quit thinking about this little girl. I would see her face. I'd be laying brick and start crying. And I would smoke a joint to keep from trying to be that way, and it wouldn't work. See, there's nothing no more powerful than God. Not even drugs. Drugs is not as powerful as God is. God was convicting me and dealing with me in such a way that I couldn't even get high enough to quit thinking about it. And so, when it got that bad, I told my wife, I said, let's don't build here. I said, let's move to Chattanooga. Our kids have been raised down here around your family. I said, let's move back to Chattanooga. Let's let them, the rest of their growing up, be raised around my family. And I called my mom, and she said, yeah, come on, everything. So, to make a long story short, we wound up in Chattanooga staying with my mom. We might have been there a week or two, I don't remember. We was, I'd found a job, we was working on saving the money, get us a place, and my mom come in there, and, since then my mom had got saved. And she said, I was praying the other night, and God spoke to me. And He said He's going to save all of my children and going to do it quick. And I said, oh gosh, I have moved to the wrong house. I said, oh my Lord, it floorboarded me, because I knew that something was working on my heart. And I didn't want to hear that. I'd heard that from them all my life. And so, anyway, we was going to a church. My wife had told me before we moved, she said, I will move under one condition, you start going to church with us. Well, I told her anything at that time. So when we moved, I started going to church with her. And we didn't go to where my family went because I knew how they acted. They get a little crazy sometimes, shouting and running and praising God, and act like they was really enjoying themselves. And I didn't want to be a part of that. We found a church where it was dead. There wasn't nothing going on. I mean, it really was. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet at any time. Not down in them, but it was pretty sad now that I know I'm a Christian and I grew a little bit, that I was comfortable in that building and not being convicted. So anyway, we went there and they had a revival. Okay, the preacher came and we went to the revival. And he preached on children one night. And I'm thinking, is this going to leave me alone or what? All I could think about was that little girl. Well, Sunday morning we got up, I took a shower. While I was in the shower, I remember, this may not happen to anybody, but this is what happened to me. I remember God was speaking to my heart. And I was thinking, what about my kids? What if something happened to my kids? I seen this family overcome that. They was praying like crazy. There was so many things going on in their church, and people were just flooding them with the Word of God and everything. And I was thinking, I'm in trouble. And then I thought, well, what about me? I am very, very seriously in trouble. So Sunday morning, we got in the car, and instead of going to the church we'd been going, I went the other way, and I went to where my mom and then went to church. It was Harmony Baptist Church up off Highway 58. Brother Fred Russell was the pastor. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember much he said that morning. I sit with my hands clamped to the pew. I know everybody always says that. They've heard that story. That was really what was taking place. And I was just sitting there rocking, and I was just, I was so under conviction. And I remember one time during his message, he got me to look up, and he said, I would rather be the pastor of this church than the president of the United States. I wouldn't downgrade myself that much. And he slammed the pulpit. And I looked up and I go, man, But anyway, he gave an invitation. And I don't know if I was the first one down, but I'll be honest with you, I don't even remember how I got down here. But I was down here on my knees, not repeating the prayer, not listening to nobody. I was down there on my knees, begging God to change my life. That I could not live another day being the same kind of person I was. And I remember one thing I did say, God, I don't even know if you can. I'm such a bad person. But I want you so much. I can't live like this no more. I'm miserable. Please, God, change my life. And when I got up, when I went back, and then I went home, I didn't realize how much God did change my life, brother. I was completely what the Bible says, a new creature. Now, I went from being a full-blown marijuana addict, could not survive. Every day of my life I smoked marijuana. And I drank a little bit. To the next morning at work, I went to work and I got all my guys together because I was the boss on the job, and I told them, I said, I got to talk to y'all this morning. I said, I really don't know exactly the full extent of what happened yesterday when I went to church, but I've given my life to God, and I said, and something's happened to me. And I said, I can't explain it to y'all right now, but I do know this 100%. No more smoking dope on my job. No more drinking. And if you got to tell your dirty jokes or all that, I said, I don't want to hear it. And I said, and I'm not being mean. I need to work. I need to do this job. I said, but if you can't live like that, you probably need to find you another job. And in about 15 minutes, I was the only man standing on my job. Everybody left. I went home crying to my wife, oh God, I've messed up. I ran them all off today. You know, I told them they got it, they can't do that stuff no more and all that. And what had happened is God really changed me. I've never desired that ever again. But I begged Him to down at the altar. And I begged Him to give me everything He'd give me. My wife said she didn't realize how saved I really was till later on. But she told me, she said, you did that? And I said, yes. She goes, you've done something that I see people that have been saved all their life never make that powerful of a stand. And I said, well, I didn't know I was doing that. I said, all I knew was just, I can't be around that more. I don't want that no more. That's not my lifestyle no more. So anyway, we started going to church at my mother's church faithfully. Never missed a service. And Brother Fred Russell, one thing that he instilled in me was, for a whole year, the first year that I was saved, is that when everything fails around you and it looks like there's no hope and nothing can better that situation, no matter what the situation is, he said, you can always depend on this. And he instilled that in me so much that I believed I had at one time, maybe for a little bit, had started thinking like my grandmother. That all I really did need was God. And He was everything, and there's nothing else that mattered. Well, we went on vacation down to South Georgia and visited my mother-in-law back to the same town where all this took place. And we come home, and then school hadn't started back yet, and I had to go back to work. And my wife said, well, we want to go back down there and visit for a little bit. And I said, well, that's fine. So they left and went back to South Georgia. Well, I went to work, kept working, and then I got a phone call. I don't know if it was a Thursday or Friday night, one night during near the end of the week. And my wife had told me that something had happened, and the man on the scene or the first person she had talked to, a doctor, was a Christian doctor, and he said, if God don't step in, this ain't going to get no better. And I want you to hear Jesse's testimony. Come on, son. And then I'm going to come back and talk to you for just a few minutes. This is what she told me.
On July the 9th, 1998, I was out riding my bike, doing my thing, hanging out, and Mom had hollered for me to come home, and I was on my way home, and I was yielded waiting across the road, and there was an 18-wheeler loaded down with logs coming by. And as soon as he come by, I went in right behind him, and there was a truck riding on the far side real low. And I never saw him, and he hit me in the head, and I was knocked 78 feet. And the doctor on the scene told my mom, said, if God don't touch Jesse, he's never going to make it. And he said, today's your day to choose who you're going to believe and trust in. And he gave her Psalms 91, and it says, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor the arrow that fleeth by day, nor for the pestilence that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the reward of the wicked, because thou hast known the Lord, which is even my refuge, even my high thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, nor any plague come nigh thy dwelling. For He shall give His angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways, and they shall bear thee up in thy hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread thy foot upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under thy feet. Because He has set His love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in time of trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. And they transported me to the hospital, and I had to have a quarter of my brain removed on the right front side. And because of my brain removal, my fever was going crazy. It was 108 to 110, and they couldn't get it to go down for nothing. And there was a holiness church in Atlanta that had heard about me on the radio, and they got in touch with Mom and Dad and said, we want to make Jesse our special prayer, and would you send us a picture of him? And they sent them a picture of me, and they were going into revival, and they would pray for me every night. And they called Mom one morning and said, no, Lisa, we don't want you to, this is of God, we don't want you to be scared or anything, but something happened last night when we were praying for Jesse through Daddy. And she told her, said, when we got done praying, we would all circle around Daddy and anoint him with oil and pray for me through him. And she said, when we got done praying for Jesse, we stood up and Daddy was soaking wet from head to toe, and the carpet all the way around him, she said it was just mushy, saturated in water. And my mom dropped the phone, and that very moment they were praying for me, I sweated my fever off and never had another one. And as time progressed, I got worse. And they came in and they were talking with my family about donating my organs, and they signed the papers that they could have them when I died. And they came in on my charts and wrote, do not resuscitate. And that was their final statement, saying, he's fixing to die. We're going to rush him to surgery and take his organs. And to make a long story short, a lot of ups and downs. 28 days later, we left ICU. I began to get a little bit better, and they were looking for a grant for me to go to a rehab, and we ended up at Siskins up by Erlanger doing rehab, and they give me 2 weeks on account of my condition. And they tried everything. They tried shocking me, moving my arms and legs, and my family knew that there really wasn't nothing there. And the last Friday we were there, they told my family, said, Monday morning we're going to point you to a place to teach you how to take care of Jesse, because he's going to be like this. And that next morning, my dad told me, he said, I got up and I walked across the room, and he said he seen my head follow him walk across the room. And he turned around and he hollered my name, and I picked my right hand up and pointed my eye, patted myself on the heart and pointed at him. I told him I loved him, and he knew that God had showed up. And Monday, when the doctors came in expecting to ship me somewhere, I was sitting up in bed and I was trying to talk to them. They called the whole hospital in. Something happened to this boy. We don't know what happened, but he was brain dead and now he's trying to talk. And my family said, yeah, God healed him. That's what happened. And I had to go through a lot of rehab to learn how to do everything all over. And even through my rehab, the nurses would get frustrated with what they were trying to do. Like, I had a bad drooling problem, and they told my family, said, listen, y'all just be happy he's how he is. He's always going to drool. This is just something. And they would say, we can't do nothing about it. Well, when they quit, next couple of days, I quit drooling. And even with my left arm, I don't have the brain in my head to move my left arm. And they were shocking my arm, trying to get my muscles to rejuvenate and move. And my mom told that nurse, said, Mary, you got to quit doing that to his arm. Just give up and let God take over. And Mary looked at her and said, well, I know where you've been, Miss Brooks, but he don't have the part of the brain to move that arm. And my mom looked at her and said, well, just give up. You're mad and frustrated. Just give up and let God do it. And she said, okay, whatever. I give up. 2 days later, I walked in that therapy room. I walked over to her. I said, Miss Mary, you got to sit down. I got to show you something. And I picked my left arm up and moved it, and her eyes got real big. And Mom looked at her and said, see, I told you, God's got all this under control, and he's working it out for his honor and glory. And God just gets all the glory out of my life. And even recently, I've been to the doctor. I went to a new neurologist in town, and he wanted to do CAT scans of my brain. And he did them, and then he called Dad and I back in for the follow-up on them. And he looked at me and said, Jesse, I don't get it. You play pool, you work with your dad, you do all this stuff. From what I'm looking at on these scans, how do you walk? And I said, well, God's up there doing it. But he said, something's doing it because you ain't got the brain to do it. And I said, well, this has been about God from day one. And it's still about God. And he said, no, you're not supposed to be doing anything. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you want me to go home? But God gets all the honor and all the glory out of my life with everything I do. And God bless y'all.
Well, we serve a good God, don't we? Whew. I mean to tell you. I remember my pastor when he had taught me that about depending on the Word of God for anything. When I got that call as a 5.5-hour trip, I'm ashamed of this now, brother, even to this day, but I remember finding my Bible. I remember calling everybody I know and getting them to start to pray. And I remember holding my Bible right here, and I was scared to death to let go of it. 5.5 hours. We stopped at the store going to get something to drink one time, and I looked over at my Sunday school teacher, which is one of my best friends at that time, and I said, he said, it's all right. Go in with it. I said, I can't put it down. Went in the store, carried my Bible. Went to the bathroom, carried my Bible. I was scared to death to put it down because I remember my pastor told me, this is the most powerful thing on this planet. And I take it for granted today that it is. But I remember getting to the hospital, and I remember everybody was kind of, what's he going to do? You know, they're already there, this scene set up, and I walk in, and Jesse was so messed up, I wouldn't have known he's my kid if I hadn't have known that's who it was. But I remember walking over to the bed and opening my Bible, and I laid his feet on it. And I said, don't nobody touch this. And we began to pray. We began to call on God, and we began to write scriptures down, and we would hang scriptures all in his room. And we'd go in there, and I hung a cross with scriptures in his room in the ICU. We'd go in there, and I would read the Word of God over him, and I would pray over him, and I would read them scriptures over and over and over. And I saturated his room with the Word of God because my pastor told me, and I believed it, that this was the most powerful thing on this planet. And I thought, boy, if I can get the power of God in there, whew, there's no telling what's going to happen. So we did that. And then they would come to us and they would give us bad news. They would come to us and they'd give us bad news. One night they came to us and he held his x-rays up. And it was a picture of Jesse's brain. He said, you see all that light? It looked like a full moon just about. He said, you see all that light-colored part? He said, that's gone. The only part that's left is right around the brainstem right there. And he said, when it shuts down, everything's going to shut down. He said, that's just tough. But in another word, and left us, there in the hall. My mom looked at me and she said, we ain't been depending on them. We hit the floor and began to pray. But when we went back in there, told everybody the news, I got angry. And it was one of the best angry situation ever happened in my life. I looked at all of my aunts and uncles that was deacons and been preachers and all these people around in there. And I remember when the news was told to them that the doctor said it was over with and he ain't got long. And I remember their countenance dropped. And I looked at them and I'm thinking, I didn't say nothing to them because I was very respectful. But I remember in my heart there was an anger building up. I was thinking, what have y'all been saying all these years? And then now a doctor says it's over with. I got mad and I went and locked myself in the chapel downstairs and wouldn't let nobody in. I don't know how long I stayed in there. And I remember screaming, I remember crying, I remember praying. And then I remember I got real quiet. And I sit there. Sometimes we just need to shut up and listen to God. All we do is tell Him what we want, what we expect out of Him. We're begging Him for all these things. He knows more what we need than we do. And I got real quiet. And I remember God speaking to my heart. The doctors has told you from day one, unless I do something, it's over with. So we got there, and what had happened was we had begun to listen to them for a little bit because they're working on Him. And you get this thing going inside of you, well, what are they going to tell us next? Or what are they going to tell us next? Or what are they going to... And they've been telling us the whole time, unless God touches me, ain't going to make it. But they tried this. They took his brain out. They done all that. And Jesse kept getting worse. And I remember that moment in there when I got real quiet. I remember God saying, trust me. Very simple. All He kept saying in my heart was, all I want you to do is trust me. Quit listening to everybody else. Do you trust me? And I remember talking to God that day, and I remember saying, I trust you. I said, He's yours. Whatever you decide, I love you so much. Whatever you decide. And I remember going upstairs. God healed me that day. I got up and it was over with. I said, it's all Him, whatever He decides. It's for His honor and glory, and whatever He decides to do, He'll help me through it no matter what anyway. And I went upstairs and I got my family together and we prayed. And I remember praying, God, whatever gives you the most honor and glory. If you decide to take Jesse, you take him. If you decide to leave him, you leave him. You know what I want. But God, for the first time in my life, what do you want? What do you want? What is going to give you the most honor and glory? What is going to please you? It's all you. It's always been about Him. We thought it was about us. We thought it was about Jesse. It ain't never been about that. It's always been about God. Give it to God. And I remember later on my brother said, I hated you that day. My brother wouldn't say. He said, how could a man pray, God, take my son? And he asked me that, and we talked. I said, I don't know. All I know is I knew that day God spoke to me and said, just trust me with his life. And that's what I did. And I said, that's what I prayed. I trusted God. For the first time in my life, we all say we trust Him, but do you really, 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 really trust Him? When it's a life and death situation, you're going to find out whether you trust Him or not. A lot of people get angry at Him. But I trusted Him. And we prayed, and Jesse got worse. We prayed, and Jesse got worse. And I remember telling my wife, I know we're doing the right thing, but why is he getting worse? We're praying, and he's getting worse. We're praying, and he's getting worse. We're not, it's like nothing's happening. They came to us. Jesse told you the doctor said he's not going to make it. We signed a paper they could have Jesse's organs. Hardest thing I ever done in my whole life. Signed a piece of paper saying they could take my son's heart out. But I could give it to God. God, whatever you decide. When they come back in, they wrote, do not resuscitate on his charts. And I asked the nurse, I said, what does that mean? They said, well, you signed a paper they could have his heart. Whenever he dies, we're going to take his heart out. And I thought, oh God, did we make the right decision? I know we did. I know we did. And so they left. Jesse was breathing on 14 breaths a minute in a drug-induced coma from day one in the hospital, had not breathed a breath on his own. And that nurse left, and I looked up there on the breathing machine not long after that, and it had 18 breaths on it. And I called her in there. I said, did y'all up the breaths on the machine? And she said, no. And I said, well, he's beginning to breathe on his own. And she said, well, he's probably just struggling. They thought he was just maybe struggling right before he passed, because we're looking at minutes now, or, hours or minutes before he passed. Later on, he started breathing more and more on his own. The next day, they took the stuff out of his mouth, the life support, and they put a trach in. Jesse had begun to breathe totally on his own. His lungs admitted it. And all I know is when they said it was impossible, and they said it was over with, and we signed a paper, and everybody wrote him off. And it even felt like I was writing him off for a little bit. I had to ask God to help me with that. God stepped in and breathed the breath of life back into Jesse. And he started breathing again. And it was unexplainable to the doctors. And we left there 28 days later out of ICU, and they said, we know God answered y'all's prayer, but Jesse's going to be a vegetable. And we went through that whole scene. And it's like, okay, whatever. And we left and went to Siskins, and Jesse told you what happened at Siskins. It was from day one. I was in my study one time later on, and I was praying, and it hit me. And for the first time, this was years later, I asked God, why? See, I was studying, and I realized God knows, sees, and hears all things. God was watching this accident. If you believe God knows and sees and hears all things, I don't believe nobody would disagree to that. Then God watched that truck hit my son, 8 years old, had never done nothing in his life wrong to deserve something like that. I'm the drug addict. I'm the one that deserves to be hit. God watched that happen. And for the first time, brother, I asked him. First time. I said, God, why did you do that? Why did you? Because I know you have the power. I didn't see you heal him. You had the power to stop the truck, but why did you let him go through this? Why did he have to do this? And God spoke to my heart like that. And he said, son, you wouldn't know me like you know me any other way. He said, now you know me, and there can't nobody change the way you know me. You know me in a way that a lot of people will never know me. You know me for every single thing that I am. And I thought, oh, God, thank you so much. I thanked him for it. Because now I know there's nobody can convince me who God is and what he is and what he does and how much he cares for us. When we was in the hospital, I told my guys, I said, find you another job. I said, I'm not coming back to work. God took care of every single thing we had. Our grass stayed cut. Our rent stayed paid. Our payments on our vehicle stayed paid. We had $14,000 in a savings account when we come out with it. We never even had a savings account in our life. We struggled paying our bills. God paid our bills better than we did. And it was like he surrounded us with his army. All because we trusted him with everything we had. Now I'm talking about we trust him with everything, because I told my wife, I said, if they come to get our cars, let them have it. I don't care. Let them have the trailer. Let them have everything. I said, I don't care about none of that. When we was in the hospital, I had solely give everything to God and said, okay, if we got it when we come out of here, it's going to be on account of him. And he done it in such a way to where it blowed me away that everything was done better than we had ever done it. And he used his people. He used you guys, people like you that knew our story, that heard about it, came and we walked around the hospital up there with a pocket full of $100 bills. Somebody come up and shake my hand, have a $100 bill in it, and I would give it to my wife. Our pocketbook was full of money. We couldn't do nothing without, every time we turned around, God was taking care of it. And it was like, this is crazy. I told my wife, I said, we got to do something with this money. We're going to get robbed. But she gave it to her mom and she went and put it up. But everything, every aspect of our life come full circle that God was showing us that he will and can take care of everything if we need him to. And I believe that with all of my heart. God can supply everything that we need. One thing that we've been praying about, then I'm going to get out of here, but I've got to share with you guys. And this has been the thing that's really meant a lot to me. We've seen a lot, and you know this, you're church people. We've seen a lot of things that will discourage you in the faith. Pastors, a lot of pastors has really, really discouraged me. I hear them talk about miracles, and I know instantly they don't even know what they're talking about. Because I've lived that. I've seen that. Send your money. Send me a prayer cloth. We'll pray over. You know, we didn't have to call nobody to come pray for Jesse. It's all about God. Not that we didn't. We had everybody praying for him, but it wasn't no single individual. God don't share His glory with no man. And if somebody proclaims they've done a miracle, you can bet your life on it that God wasn't in it, because He ain't sharing that with nobody. Now, I don't know who did it, or if it was just a coincidence or whatever, but if God's in it, He's going to fix it to where He gets all the honor and all the glory, because He is the one that done it. There ain't no man going to share that. And so by saying all that, we've seen all these people since I've been saved that will destroy the real God by the way that they teach and the way they preach and everything. And the way that mostly the way they treat people. We've met a lot of people that's very arrogant, has a lot of pride. And when you've lived the life we've lived and you've seen God's real people, you can instantly tell that's not real. This is pride. This is not good. And it will start to diminish on your faith and your trust, but not in God, but in where's his people at. Jesse's had to struggle ever since his accident of fitting into a society as kids growing up and then now young adults. And me and my wife has prayed about it. We've cried about it. We've prayed about it. We've cried about it. We just want him to fit in somewhere. He struggled with it. And other churches that we've been, he struggled with it. And then he came here. I'm sorry. And then he came here. And he started coming. And Miss Kim started praying. And he met you guys. And every day that he left this building or he would leave with you guys, he would come home and he would say, Daddy, I love them people. I love them so much. And I heard that over and over and over. Every time Jesse comes home, he says, Daddy, I love them. Daddy, I love them. You guys don't really know what it means for somebody not to be able to drive himself to the store, not be able to have friends that he hangs out with every day of his life. There was a part of that was missing, that was killing me and my wife. And then he came here, and here comes God again. And he says, I'm going to take care of that too. And you've given him a social life outside these walls that has meant so much to me and my wife, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for it. That a 25-year-old man can come home and say, Daddy, I love them people. I love them people. We've never heard that before. And then he came here and I thought, thank God, He's answered another prayer. And you guys have done an awesome job. And I'm going to tell you something. We've been to 3 or 4 different churches, been members of 3 or 4 different churches. And I guess this was just the one that God wanted him to be at. He came here and he joined on his own. He done his own thing. And God has used you in a mighty, mighty way. And you may not realize this, but I believe with all my heart, you got a special award coming from God one day. It may be when you get to heaven. Because He loves people that loves His people. He said that's how we know who we are, is that we love the brethren. That's how we know that who you are a Christian, when you pass from death into life, and the proof of that is that you love each other. See, so you have renewed our faith in such a way that it was destroyed by so many other people. That God is still real and His people still real. Don't ever lose that. It reminds me of Mr. Sheely that changed my life. You know what changes people's lives? Not cramming Jesus down their throat. But what changes their life is loving them like Jesus did. That's what changes their life. And you know what? They'll never be the same. For all of my life since I've got saved, you know, I tell people about Mr. Sheely on a regular basis. Because God used him to change my life, because it was somebody that I knew another man could love a man in the right way, and you could call it love. See, you got something special going on here. Don't ever lose it. And we can tell you, you know, firsthand, because of the places that we've been and the things that we've seen. But when he come home and starts talking like that, You really, really, really got something. But always remember, it's all about God, and just love people. You know, I've got a thing that I have a hard time dealing with people that don't like people that's hooked on drugs and been on drugs. I came from that background. You can't quit on your own, but I know somebody that can get rid of it for you. And I know he can do it the right way. You know what? All these things are going to take place in our lives when God gets all the honor and glory. And it ain't going to take place until then. You know why? Because he ain't going to share that with nobody. He's not going to do it. But I love you guys, and I want you to know how much that you mean to us and how much you mean to my son. I can only imagine how God feels when you brag on his son, because when you do something for my son, you got a part of my heart. And I can only imagine when we do something for God's son, what kind of a part of his heart that we got. Just remember that. I love you guys. Thank you for listening to us.